Today in Ancient DOS Games, we're taking a look at Quest for Glory 2, Trial by Fire. Naturally, this is a sequel to the first Quest for Glory game I covered way back around the start of Season 3, making use of the Sierra Creative Interpreter engine to provide an inventory-based adventure game which is kind of an odd mix between both a mouse-driven interface and a parser-driven interface. Now, I have to say, I didn't get very far in this game, but it's not because I wasn't trying, just because I really didn't have enough time. Unlike a typical inventory adventure, this game does an extremely good job of masking its linearity, because the story is actually extremely linear, but you're given frames of time to complete objectives in, which can overlap in some cases, and there's a number of side quests you have to accomplish in order to get what you need to survive the final moments of the game. At least according to what I've read, because again, I didn't get it even as far as capturing my first elemental. There's so much to do that until you've spent hours playing through this, you won't know what steps lead to what avenues of success. And there's a lot of random chance to factor into all of this as well. In many ways, this makes Quest for Glory 2 a worthy successor to the original, taking the original formula and making it both more approachable and more freeform, despite the main story always playing out pretty much the same way for all the character classes. Now, that said, the game does have some shortcomings which can bog down the experience if you're not completely sure how to deal with them. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that while I didn't have the time to see most of what this game had to offer, it feels like a solid game with a ton of stuff to do and only minor annoyances. Quest for Glory 2 was originally created and released by Sierra Online in 1990, although a remake was released by AGD Interactive in 2008, featuring all new graphics and mostly unchanged gameplay. It's a one-player inventory-based adventure / RPG, with support for Hercules, CGA, Tandy, EGA, and VGA cards, typically running at 320x200 resolution and optimally with 16 colors. There's also support for MCGA graphics chipsets, but only for EGA compatibility, as there's no actual 256 color graphics anywhere in the original game. The original game also supported a decent number of audio devices, and in fact pretty much all of the mainstream devices of the time. And although Sound Blaster support is promoted, it doesn't actually have any digitized sound effects, as far as I can tell. As for its current release date, this depends on which copy you want. The original release is still commercial and can be obtained as a digital download from the Good Old Games website at www.gog.com, bundled together with all 5 Quest for Glory games for $10. If you prefer a physical copy for sake of collecting, you have a couple options. The original game isn't all that rare and can often be found fully boxed for between $15 and $30, although you'll never find loose copies, since you not only need the manual to get past the later section of the game, but also because the game came on 9 floppy disks. Your other option for a physical copy is the Quest for Glory Anthology or Quest for Glory Collection series, both of which are CDs which contain the first 4 games, both of which are actually rarer than the original game itself, possibly due to it being easier to run thanks to being on CDs instead of discs. And they tend to go for between $20 and $40 from what I can tell. However, if all you want to do is play the game and aren't too concerned with the other entries in the series, you can go for the remake, which is freeware and available from the AGD Interactive website at www.agdinteractive.com. The remake plays remarkably similar to the original game, just with updated graphics, and is a perfectly valid option, although I'm not certain what kind of compatibility there is between versions and releases in terms of character importing. More on that later. Quest for Glory 2 is a direct sequel of the original game. Sort of. The hero from the first game finds himself traveling across the lands on a magic carpet with some new friends, including 2 katas, anthropomorphic feline creatures named Shamin and Shima, as well as a human friend by the name of Abdullah Du, who hails from the desert city of Shapir. In fact, Abdullah happens to be guiding all of you back to where he hails from, and when you all arrive, the katas provide you with some new threads and set up an inn. Now, one thing I think is really cool about this game is that it breaks tradition in typical RPGs and adventure games by making food and rest at the inn completely free of charge, since it's being run by friends whom you helped previously. The game starts up not much time after the inn's been set up and running. Abdullah stops by one morning to talk to you and suggests that the best way to experience the land is to go adventuring. As the endgame days progress, you learn of a prophecy which actually starts to unfold before your eyes, and unless you take action to stop these calamities as they happen, the entire city of Shapier will be destroyed. And it actually brings up one pertinent detail about the game, is that it tracks how many days have passed since you begun your adventure. And this is important, as each day typically has certain activities you want to get done immediately or within a couple or 3 days. The more cataclysmic events will end the game after certain day numbers are reached as well. And there's ultimately an event which takes you away from the city, which has to be completed by day 30. The day count stops having any relevance once you're well past the halfway point and no longer near Shapier. Since this is a Sierra Creative Interpreter game, it functions about as you would expect, with some unusual twists given that this is the only game to be running this particular version of the SCI engine. You can move around either by left-clicking where you want to move to or using the numeric keypad with numlock disabled. You can type things in to bring up the command parser, which allows you to interact with the world. And you have 2 ways of looking at things, either by looking at them with the command parser or by using the right mouse button and clicking on the things you want to look at. I highly recommend using the mouse under most circumstances, since if you're not getting the words completely right with the text parser, you may end up looking at the wrong things or may not get the information you're actually looking for. Conversation is also a lot different in this game than typical Sierra titles. Although you can talk to a few people using the talk command, you'll actually make much more progress and learn lots more if you use the ask and tell commands, which allow you to ask NPCs about specific topics or tell them about things which have happened which they aren't aware of. The NPC you converse with will always be the closest one to your character position whom's willing to speak to you, which can actually be a little annoying when a random NPC moves around and gets in the way of your conversation, but fortunately this doesn't happen often and they'll ultimately walk away. You also have the ability to not just buy items with the buy command from the various merchants, but it's also possible to haggle with them to try to get better prices, which draws upon your character's communication skill. Actually, I should probably go over the whole stats thing, since this game's actually a cross between a typical inventory adventure and a role-playing game. But before I do, I should probably also talk about an intriguing feature the game has involving importing characters. And a pertinent question one of my Patreon supporters, Anton Panetta, has about this is, does it have save importing? If it does, what carries over, and does it do anything special? Also, for curiosity's sake, does it work between either version of QFG1, VGA, or only the EGA? So yes, Quest for Glory 2 has a feature where it can import character files from Quest for Glory 1. Now, notice I said character files, not save files. When you beat the first Quest for Glory game, it actually asks you if you wish to create a character file for later import into a sequel. The character files aren't nearly as detailed as the save files, and only store character stats, the amount of money the character has, and the character's items and spells. When Quest for Glory 2 imports a character file, it reads in the stats, adds defaults for the new honor and communication stats, provides certain default items or spells if the character is missing them for their class, and also transfers over money and a tiny number of the items from the first game which are also in the second game. Beyond this, it really doesn't do anything special, and otherwise just makes it easier to win Quest for Glory 2 because you don't have to spend as much time powering up your stats as you would with a brand new character. As for if the character files are compatible between the various versions of the game, it's hard to say. I tried to look into this, and all I kept finding out was that the save files weren't compatible between different versions of the same game, in terms of the first Quest for Glory and the remake of the second one, so I'm not entirely certain. If someone knows the answer to this, please let me know so I can add it as additional information in the video description. Anywho, the stats here work pretty much the same as they did in the original Quest for Glory, but as I mentioned, there's 2 new stats. The communication stat is pretty much strictly used for haggling, and you can improve it anytime you converse with people and either learn new things or make purchases. The honor stat, however, is interesting. This is used to measure whether or not your character can become a paladin at the very end of the game. Honor is raised by doing noble things, and there's one thing in particular you can do which can decrease it. Virtually any character can become a paladin, although it's a much easier thing to accomplish as a fighter, and more meaningful that way as well, as the wizard and thief don't really have stats to suit such a character. Not to mention it's harder to get enough honor as them to do so. In fact, the thief The thief isn't even able to get a perfect score if you want them to become a paladin. Although, speaking of stats, health was always a major stumbling block in the first game, but here, having an inn you can rest at for free for safely regenerating health and stamina makes staying alive so much easier than before. Plus you can rest at the desert oasis too, although without any time options. The game also tracks hunger and thirst, and while thirst is easy to gauge thanks to the water skins you carry around, hunger doesn't have any immediate means of being checked. So the best thing you can do is make sure to eat your morning and evening meals at the inn, well, you can anyways, and that will make it so that you avoid consuming your rations. It's also possible to buy more rations from the food stall, although the game doesn't do a good job of explaining how. Or if it does, I completely missed it. Actually, this kind of leads into one of my main gripes with the game, in that you spend a lot of the first 2/3 of the game just doing stuff in Shapier. Yeah, there's this huge desert to explore, but there's actually very little of interest in the desert. Well, save for random encounters, which you can use to buff up your fighting skills and earn cash, or items you can sell for cash. In fact, from what I understand, if you play as a thief, you can almost completely avoid exploring the desert due to how the thief progresses through their side quests in order to get what they need to survive the later parts of the main quest. The other minor annoyance I want to get out of the way is the street walking you do at the start of the game. This takes freaking forever, and because of how the graphics look, it's way too easy to get lost, even when you know how to make it around the city. Worse still, this isn't optional. To get a map of the city so you know where to go, you have to find the money changer, who's tucked away in a particular section which is virtually impossible to get to by accident. Not to mention the directions you're given to find her are extremely hard to follow, as it seems like you're being told to go north, then take the first left, the next 5 rights, then a left. What you're actually being told is to go north, take the first left, take the next 4 rights when you're at intersections, then at the next intersection, take a left. This last one is the tricky part because of how it's worded, and if you end up taking 5 rights and then a left, you'll just end up going back the way you came. Now, the game actually did come with a printed map of the city, with all the road names listed, so if you have that, then it's not so bad. But without that, you're going to spend over half an hour lost in these streets for sure. Once you have your money changed into local currency and purchase a map, then you're set. The map you buy not only shows you your position in the city, but also allows you to fast travel to places you've already been, cutting down tremendously on the tedium. Traveling the desert, though, can also be a bit tedious, but again, there's very few reasons to go exploring this place. Chances are you'll want to save before setting out, explore a bunch, eventually die of exposure or hostiles, then set out again and explore different parts than before. And keep this up until you know where the few points of interest are. Then you just go straight for those points later on. Exploring the desert without a source, though, is probably a bad idea. Not too far into the game, though not immediately, you'll meet a guy who will sell you a saurus from the stables just outside the town gates. These creatures make running around the desert a little faster and a lot less tiring. But there's a couple things you need to know which the game doesn't really explain all that well if you want to make the most of them. The key thing being that they absolutely do not help in combat, contrary to what you're told. If enemies appear, your source will knock you off and run away. Once this happens, the source will start to hightail it back to the stables. However, if you defeat the enemies which assaulted you, leave the screen you're on, and come back, the source will likely reappear there and you can climb back on. And of course, I'm referring to the screen where the enemies first fight you. If you actually move away from that screen and then fight the enemies, the source will go back to the screen you were originally at. Now, if it doesn't, just try this a couple more times before making the decision to walk back, because, yeah, walking back is possible, but your chances aren't good unless you've got more than just a single water skin that you started with. Which, oh, by the way, buy an extra 3 or 4 of those things as soon as you find the leather merchant. The combat in this game is a little more dynamic than in the first game. Prior to combat, you're able to throw daggers and cast spells as before. Then once combat begins, you pull out your main weapon and begin to fight. At this point, you use the numeric keypad to either attack, parry, or dodge. The upper row is for swing attacks or thrusts, the middle row is for parrying with a sword or a shield, while the bottom row is for dodging. Now, the trick to surviving combat mostly comes down to recognizing the timing and the patterns involved so as to parry or dodge enemy attacks while getting your own strikes in when the enemy is most vulnerable. Now, as before, you also want to search the bodies of the enemies you defeat, though makes absolutely sure you say to search, as just looking at or even using the examine keyword won't actually perform a search, and you won't ever get anything that way. The command parser is also available in combat for casting spells or running away, though to run away you absolutely need to use the escape command, as trying to type in run will never work. Now, I will say, the combat is a lot more responsive in this game than it was in the original, but the timing feels odd. Whenever you parry or dodge, those moves last for a specific amount of time, yet the amount of time between enemy attacks can sometimes be random to a degree, thus your parry or dodge will conclude before the enemy's attack actually strikes. And one tip I have is that when the enemy is paused between strikes, don't parry or dodge right at the start. Those pauses are your opportunity to strike, and if such a strike misses the mark, that is when you should try to parry or dodge. And it's easier said than done, but again, a lot easier to get used to than in the original game. Plus there's an option to adjust the quote, arcade difficulty of things, like the combat, to make it more easy if you're having trouble with it. This also actually affects some mini-games as well, such as an arm wrestling mini-game, which I got destroyed at since I tried to do it with 0 stamina. Go me! Overall, I like Quest for Glory 2 more than the original, even though you spend most of the game wandering around this one city and out to various minor points of interest in the desert. The game is balanced better, feels more responsive, has a ton more dialogue potentials, and it actually has a way of sucking you into its world and making you feel like you have a lot more control over this world despite the hard time limit and ultimately linear path through the main story. The game's easier too, despite some of the ridiculous puzzles which crop up and which can end a run if you fail to clear them, though it's less of a problem here than in most Sierra adventures in general. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that if you're interested in adventure titles, or RPGs, or want to see how a merging of the two genres works out, this is a better one to start with than the first game, as it's much more approachable and forgiving. As for DOSBox settings, the game works fine with the auto cycle setting, but load times are a bit longer than they need to be. The GOG release sets a fixed cycles count of 10,000 by default, and this is actually a decent number to go with. You also have the option of running the game in ScumVM if you prefer to go that route, and it's something I often forget to mention, as I just tend to stick with DOSBox for everything. There's no real reason, it's just what's comfortable for me. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next episode will be on Saturday, June 3rd, and I'll be covering a game which is kind of like a cross between Cannon Fodder and XCOM. Yeah, such a thing exists. So if you think you know which game that might be, then be sure to send your guess to adg@pixelships.com, and stay tuned to see what I've got in store. Plus, I also want to quickly mention I have a new weekly series starting Monday, June 5th. That'll feature 100% original content, so be sure to stay tuned for that one as well. Thanks for watching everyone, and special thanks to those of you supporting me on Patreon. Here's just a small sample of you guys.